Hey listeners, this Read, Talk, Grow episode is one of our best of series that we will play for the next several weeks. Over the spring, we'll be working hard behind the scenes to create fresh, exciting episodes that will keep you engaged and inspired. Our new content features some fabulous books. Areas of focus will include mental health, cancer, and of course, women's health. We hope you'll enjoy revisiting this conversation. We look forward to seeing you mid-June. Keep reading, everyone. Welcome to the Read, Talk, Grow podcast, where we explore women's health topics through books. In the same way that books can transport us to a different time, place, or culture, Read, Talk, Grow demonstrates how they can also give us a new appreciation for health experiences. Books can provide understanding of health topics and provide a platform from which women's health can be discussed. At Read Talk Grow, we use books to learn about health conditions in the hopes that we can all lead healthier, happier lives. I'm your host, Dr. Denise Milstein. I'm an assistant professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic, where I practice women's health, internal medicine, and integrative medicine. I am always reading, and I love discussing books with my patients, my friends, my professional colleagues, and now with you. I'm so excited about our episode today. Our book is Blood Orange Night, My Journey to the Edge of Madness by Melissa Bond. Our episode will focus on a tricky and inadequately discussed group of medications called benzodiazepines. These sedative, relaxant, and anti-anxiety medications have enormous potential for dependence and addiction with dangerous, even lethal withdrawal symptoms in those who try to come off them too rapidly. They're commonly known by brand names such as Ativan, Valium, Xanax, and others, as well as generic names like lorazepam, diazepam, and alprazolam. These medications can be prescribed for any number of clinical indications, but have to be used with care. Our guests today include Melissa Bond. She's a narrative journalist and poet. Her memoir, Blood Orange Night, was selected by the New York Times as one of the best audiobooks of 2022. Melissa has been a regular contributor for Mad in America, and she's been interviewed and featured on ABC World News Tonight, PBS Story in the Public Square, RadioWest, and many podcasts. She lives in Salt Lake City with a wild bunch of teenagers. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
My second guest is Dr. Michael Campbell, who's a board certified ambulatory care pharmacist. He works under a collaborative practice agreement with Mayo Clinic providers to improve patient outcomes in a wide variety of disease states. Largely, his focus involves resolving medication related problems with individuals for chronic disease, including medication dependence.
Dr. Milstein, Melissa, thanks for the invite, and I'm really excited to talk about this very important topic for our listeners today.
Blood Orange Night, My Journey to the Edge of Madness is Melissa Bond's memoir of what starts as severe insomnia that's initially dismissed and unsupported by healthcare professionals and her support system alike. As the mother of young children, Melissa finally meets a doctor she calls in the book Dr. Amazing, who prescribes a medication that initially provides her with glorious full night of sleep and starts what will become her dependence and tolerance on benzodiazepines that she doesn't even recognize until she's deep in it, facing the arduous task of attempting to slowly wean down on the medications to get her life back. Melissa, this book is so brave, and we're going to talk about these medications, but let's start talking about insomnia. So
Yeah.
many of our listeners will have had sleepless nights, but this was insomnia to another degree. Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, because it was shocking to me. I had what I call the chamomile popsicle kind of insomnia where you have like an hour or two, and you're up and you're sort of like, when am I going to get back to sleep? Or you're restless. But this truly, the description, I'm pretty sure I put this in the book, was of a scene out of Pulp Fiction where the character Uma Thurman has overdosed on heroin and John Travolta, his character, he realizes he's got to do something and shoves like a huge needle into her heart that's, I think, of adrenaline. And she lurches up. This is what I remember as Uma Thurman lurching up. The night that it happened, it was a very distinct night. I remember putting my son to bed, and around 9:30, I literally felt a sudden rush in my chest and a breathlessness, and I lurched up and I felt jittery. And that was the first night of what I believe that first night I did not sleep at all. There are probably times where you drop off and you get maybe a minute or two or something like that, but it was what I experienced was night after night of truly barely sleeping, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour or two, such that I was truly on the verge of a psychotic break for that first trimester that I was pregnant. It was unlike anything I've ever experienced. And for those of your listeners who've experienced it, you start having cognitive decline. You can't think straight. You can't remember things. Your body starts falling apart. There's a tremendous amount of pain. So it truly felt like CIA level interrogation techniques, but as a mom.
Yeah,
So,
and oh, by the way, you had to be up and functioning during the day, not
right,
feeling well, and also being really dismissed when you say, I didn't sleep at all last night. You describe some scenes where people say to you, oh, surely that's wrong. You just don't know that you slept.
right.
And I think that adds just insult to injury. Michael, there are a lot of medications that we use short term for insomnia. Maybe if somebody is traveling between time zones or they have an abrupt stress or situation. Can you give us a high level understanding of what some of those medications might be?
Sure. I think some of the medications that Melissa discusses in her book or that we've talked about today are predominantly the benzodiazepine drugs. So you mentioned three. Those are probably the three most popular: alprazolam, lorazepam, clonazepam, which the brand name for that medication is Klonopin. Those drugs can be utilized short term. They're generally not the first class of drugs we would go to. We usually utilize medications like zolpidem, zaloplan, and ezopiclone. Those drugs are newer, what we call benzodiazepine receptor agonists. So you can think about those like drugs that piggyback on the same location in your brain where alprazolam, lorazepam, and diazepam work at. They were thought to have fewer side effects, but as we'll discuss later, we've later found out that that's not necessarily true in most instances.
And a lot of people would use an over the counter antihistamine for some short term sleep support. Would you agree? So often this will come labeled as a PM, and very often it's going to be a generic formulation of diphenhydramine, which is also called Benadryl. But those two, while they can make you sleepy, can give you a hangover effect and can build up tolerance. So the one of the main points to make here is that there are some medications to support sleep in the short term, but all of them are going to have side effects and need to be used with caution. Okay, so Melissa, you're not sleeping. You're
Right.
absolutely desperate.
Yep.
You're pregnant,
Yep.
so very few medications that doctors feel comfortable giving to pregnant women. You finally see somebody who believes the severity of what you're experiencing, and zolpidem, which Michael just mentioned, also called Ambien, is prescribed to you. Talk about what happens with that medication.
So I had just passed my first trimester milestone and had gone in to see one of the nurse midwives that was in this clinic that I was seeing, and really think I scared. It was this sort of young nurse midwife, and she was completely unprepared for the level of distress I was in. I was not being coherent. I was talking to her, and then I would flash to the painting that was on the wall and say like, "Oh, that's so lovely." And if I don't, I think I actually said to her, if I don't get help, I'm going to ram my head into a concrete wall. I just kept thinking, I've got to knock myself out. So she put her hands up and backed out of the room and said, I'm going to go get a consult. So she prescribed Ambien, as you said, with Benadryl. And that first night, I felt like I slept like 7 hours. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can be the cat in the hat of motherhood now, like I can like teach my son to sign in Egyptian. I have got this nailed good. But one of the things about pregnancy is you have all kinds of bizarre body symptoms, and we don't clinically know. We know a lot, but there's so many things that can happen. And I was having lots of side effects. I was having heart palpitations. I always felt like I needed a chaise lounge right next to me because I might faint. And I didn't know, is this the pregnancy? Is this the Ambien? And I did have a lot of what I've heard uh, people be cautioned against is the breakthrough waking. And so there were several nights that I would wake up after 3 hours of sleep, and I would be convinced I had to drive to Southern Utah to buy a donut or something like that. Like, I mean, it was just like real craziness. And then the sleep actually, because I was prescribed it throughout the rest of my pregnancy, the efficacy of the drug waned fairly quickly. And I was back down to maybe 3 or 4 hours a night, which felt awful, but I at least wasn't on the verge of a psychotic break.
So, Michael, these are common effects of using zolpidem for a long time. This behavior where you kind of wake up, or maybe you don't even fully come awake and you're going to drive your car, call those parasomnias. Is that something that you see in people who are on these medications? And are there other side effects to the medications when they're used over longer than a very short term?
That's a very good question, Dr. Milstein, and it's multifactorial. And I want to start by mentioning for the audience that as pharmacists, we like to break patients into two buckets. So patients 18 to 64, they oftentimes experience different side effects in the beginning and late in therapy with these drugs. And then patients over the age of 65 experience a different set of, I'll say, benefits and concerns with these drugs. So customarily, everyone, whether you're 18 years old to 98 years old, will experience a lot of benefits in the first 4 weeks. Okay. But after the first 4 weeks, that's when we start to see, the deleterious effects where, I've seen patients or had their loved ones tell me, my husband woke up and he, in his underwear, was watering the neighbor's grass at 2 in the morning, and he didn't recall that ever transpired. Other spouses have said, well, my spouse went to the grocery store, bought a bunch of foods he's never eaten, and returned home with them. I've had other patients tell me, I baked an entire chicken overnight, and the only reason I know I did that was because I was awoken because it was burning. So those things can transpire. They're not common. Well, where I'll say it will happen to half of patients, but maybe 5% of patients will experience, effects like that if they take the drug months to years on end.
And no matter what, it's terrifying because the idea that you would operate a car or interact with other people or expose yourself is really so frightening. And Melissa, you talk in the book about you called your memory just vapor. The next day, you don't even necessarily have any recollection of this. Okay, let's keep moving the story forward. So we just said you were early in this pregnancy, you took the medication, and the messaging I think you were getting from your team was this is just the pregnancy and your stress. Once you have your baby, you'll go back to being able to sleep. But unfortunately, this is not what happens for you. You continue to struggle and now have two small people to take care of on a regular basis, one who's an infant. And you find Doctor amazing. So he gives you an explanation. This is your cortisol. You're just too stressed. Here's what we're going to do. Tell our listeners.
So yes, so I had gotten off the Ambien, when I delivered my daughter, thinking, as you said, that it was hormonal. And 3 months in, I was just clawing at the walls again. Just, she was a high need baby. I was nursing, but I was literally, I felt at that point I was back to 1 or 2 hours a night. So I go to see Dr. Amazing, who to me felt as though he straddled the line between sort of Western medicine and then traditional, more homeopathic, really was interested in Chinese medicine. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is great. I've got someone who doesn't want to just throw medication at me, but isn't resistant to it, And he said, yes, it's a cortisol issue, but we need to get you sleeping or your adrenals will not repair themselves. So I'm going to give you this wonderful drug. It's a sedative hypnotic. And the two lines I remember, he said, it's about as addictive as coffee. And I know someone who has taken them for 19 years with no problem. This is a wonderful drug. And so I just took that at face value because it had been so many months of just basically surviving. And as you said, I had a child with a disability who was 1.5 years, and then I had a newborn.
This part really made me cringe because, of course, I practice integrative medicine. And while I'm glad you got somebody to finally listen to you and be thoughtful about your care, here started the beginning of what we'll talk about more and how it manifested. So, Michael, do you want to talk about the benzos in terms of how they work, why Melissa started to need higher doses as she continued to use them?
Yeah, the first thing that I want to highlight for the audience is that these benzodiazepine drugs and the other subset of piggyback medications, zolpidem, zaloplan, and ezopiclone, so Ambien, Sonata, and Lunesta, those are the brand names. All those medications are controlled substances, meaning that the Drug Enforcement Agency has labeled those medications as things that pharmacists and physicians can utilize to help patients with insomnia or whatever disorder we're treating, but we need to be aware of, and more importantly, counsel patients that these medications have a higher potential to cause harm than the shorter term drugs that are over the counter, like Benadryl, Z-Quil, Unisom, diphenhydramine, doxylamine. So those medications are not controlled substances, and they can be used and safely purchased over the counter without a pharmacist or doctor's advice, counseling, prescription, or an order. Even those medications, after 2 weeks, you should still consult, your physician about this. The benzodiazepine drugs, they bind to the same part in your brain that alcohol binds to. So they bind in a different fashion as well and have a different set of effects. And we know alcohol is not necessarily a drug, it's more of a food, but it has regulatory parameters behind it. And people are counseled on that just by the manufacturers. Well, with benzodiazepines, sometimes we only talk about the benefits and not the concerns. The reason I think or know that Melissa developed tolerance to these medications is that when you take them long term, longer than 4 weeks, these receptors in your brain, unlike caffeine, which is in coffee, and unlike Benadryl and Unisom, your brain starts to make less of these receptors. So every time, the 4 milligrams breaks into its tiny chemical and hits its one receptor, let's say you have 1 million of those in your brain. Well, after 4 weeks, that may only turn into 750,000. A year later, it could only be 500,000. So the moral is, over time, the same dose is less effective, requiring more of it to produce the same response. So that leads to misuse, abuse, tolerance, dependence, and the most problematic phase is the addictive properties that it can cause.
And the first medication you were taking, Melissa, if we haven't said yet, was lorazepam, which also comes as the brand name Ativan's very commonly used medication from this class. This next section of your book you call The Lost Year. It's a very uh, it's an excellent title for what you experienced, but we tell our listeners what that was like?
Yeah, so let me see. I was prescribed the medication, and then within the next 6 months had the medication upped by 2 milligrams until I was up to 6 milligrams of Ativan to be taken nightly by prescription from my doctor. And so I did that, never did more. And I think within, let's see, after I had gotten up to 6 milligrams, the doctor also was not in town a lot. So I all of the sudden, when I had felt vaporous with taking the Ambien, I was truly like a ghost. I remember my husband and I moved into a new house because we were going to have 2 kids. Was losing my balance. I was constantly walking through rooms and running into things. I would be falling. I would hold my daughter in the yard and would like take a step and fall. I couldn't remember anything from one day to the next, which was very disturbing for me because I had been narrative journalist. And so tracking stories and tracking details was very important and very much a part of what my profession was and required. So not knowing that someone had come to the door, a friend had come and said, hey, let's hang out tomorrow. We'll get the kids, and me having no recollection whatsoever was very odd. And so this went on for a number of months where I really was just sort of a ghost, trying to make sure I was taking care of the kids, not remembering what I needed to get at the grocery store. Where did I make sure that my son wasn't, that the gate, he has Down syndrome and autism, and so we had to have a gate in the front because he loved running down the center of a street straight towards a car when he was younger. And so we had to make sure the gate was closed. There was always this constant panic of, did I lock the gate? Did I lock the doors? What have I forgotten? And on top of that, I started feeling a tremendous amount of pain in my body. My joints would ache. My eyes started sort of shivering. I ended up not being able to read very well. I felt like I had the flu 24/7. And I think it's remarkable. I think probably anyone that has had sort of a long-term illness will know that denial is huge. And also when you don't understand, trying to fit the narrative of your life into some kind of bucket that makes sense to you. So I kept saying, boy, parenting is the hardest thing I've ever experienced. I'm exhausted all the time and I feel sick. And then the moment where everything changed was a night when I was picking up my daughter out of the bath and was taking a step outside of the bath to go to her bedroom and put on her little pajamas. And I took a step and I literally fell like a dead body from a bridge. My muscles just completely went liquid. Almost rammed her head into a corner wall until I like flipped over and shoved my shoulder into the wall. And I lay there and I thought, I must have MS. I must have some kind of neurological condition because this is how it starts. There's cognitive impairment, there are balance issues, I'm not tracking with my eyes, all of these things. And then 45 seconds later, my legs came back on. And then I thought, wait a minute, that medication by Dr. Amazing, how much do I really know about it? And I started to do the research.
Michael, when I prescribe these medications to patients, which I do sometimes, I will often give the warning that these medications can be a trap. Nobody starts taking these medications wanting to be dependent on them, but as you get into this cycle of, whatever, if you're taking them for anxiety or for sleep or for muscle spasms, right, then your body gets accustomed to it and you keep taking them and you keep taking more, and they have side effects. Can you react to that description that it's a trap? What I often will say is we just have to respect this medication because it's powerful and its power can be beneficial, but it also can sort of pull you into what Melissa has just described as a terrifying situation that's very hard to get out of.
Yeah, a lot of what Melissa you've described today is resonating with me as a pharmacist, and one of the things I want to share that we don't oftentimes highlight is that lorazepam or Ativan specifically is a drug that we use in critical care or ICU units, and those are life-saving and emergency medications. Well, there's no emergency that lasts greater than 4 weeks. So if we ask any patient who we save in the ICU, we save their life, hey, would you like to take this medication for the next 4 weeks to 4 years? All of them would decline doing so. And Ativan is one of those medications in those code cards. And when you take medications like that long term, it is a trap. It puts your body back into the state of trauma that you've just been rescued from. You know, insomnia can seem very emergent. And when you rectify it, you know, with that first dose, remember receptors are being downgraded, so there's less of them. They're not meant to be utilized long term. And I don't think that we tell patients exactly what to expect, what to do if they start to experience those side effects, and how to safely use the medicine beyond 4 weeks, mainly with other medications, therapies, and follow-up appointments with therapists, physicians, pharmacists, nurses. It takes a team to manage long-term use of emergent medications.
And I want to be clear about these medications because there are some times, there are some clinical situations where they need to be used long term. And as long as that's the intention and the risk benefit analysis has been done, and the patient and healthcare professional have had the conversation around what are the risks, it's not that these medications are never taken long term. So if listeners are on them and asking that question, please talk to your specific healthcare team about that. But Melissa, you really trusted this doctor and trusted the explanation for everything that you were going through. And now you were in this sort of hole that you had to basically find your way out of on your own or find people to help you. And that wasn't easy either. Talk about finally finding a team that could help unwind everything that had happened.
Yeah. So one thing to note is that this was when I received my first prescription, this was 2010. So 14 years ago. The awareness really, when I talk about awareness, that there was medical literature that really made it clear even back then. I mean, we've known for a long time that benzodiazepines really disrupt the brain and dysregulate it. However, what we know medically and what's in the medical papers can often be really redirected with marketing, with intelligent and clever marketing. And then that becomes part of the cultural milieu and the way people talk about them. You know, like Stephen Colbert would joke about Xanax, and you know, the rappers talk about it, and there was like a cultural lexicon and a way of talking about them much more back then, but it's still true today. That was very casual, very much like this is your chill pill. You know, it was like, oh my gosh, you know, honey, you just need to like take a chill pill and then you can take care of the rest of your, you know, of your day, or, you know, the executive that's going in for a crazy board meeting. And so there wasn't an awareness. And so for me to suddenly realize that I was in that hole, and not only was I in that hole, but I couldn't just stop. And it wasn't because the insomnia would come back. If I stopped cold turkey, I could have a fatal seizure or go psychotic and, you know, rave about the apocalypse in my yard. Neither of which I wanted, but I wanted more than anything to get off these drugs. I'd always been a very like granola-ish, you know, rock climbing yoga girl. And suddenly I'm realizing that what I'm seeing in the research is that for me to effectively get off without causing even more trauma or having a fatal seizure, I would have to slowly titrate over months, if not years, to enable my brain to recover functioning. And I thought, I have never heard of a withdrawal that could last years. That is not just like you're slowly tapering, you're in pain the whole time. And that was something that I was shocked was not communicated to me by my provider.
And oh, by the way, life continues to go on while you're
Yes.
going through this
Kids
process.
are still asking for milk.
Yeah, and you still need to function and, the next thing can easily happen. Michael, what's the danger in just stopping these medications, particularly if you're on a higher dose?
So the danger is and commonplace to experience withdrawal. Now, some of that can be managed or mitigated at home if you're simply aware of the withdrawal symptoms, the common ones being dizziness, fatigue, headache, nausea. That can happen with caffeine. These drugs, though, with Ativan or Ambien, they have a more complex, we'll call it a withdrawal syndrome that can turn into an urgent, emergent, or life-threatening situation if you don't get prompt medical intervention. And those withdrawal symptoms, which do not happen with, Benadryl, caffeine, or, other sleep medications like trazodone, are agitation, chills without fever, night sweats that are unexplained that you didn't have prior to stopping the medication, electric like brain zaps or limb zaps that you have a sensation of. Those could last 3 months to a year after stopping the medication. Tremor, vivid dreams, muscle pain, nerve pain. Those things, when they happen in conjunction with each other, create this kind of withdrawal syndrome that requires medical intervention and other prescription drugs to actually treat.
I think one of the important comparisons since now in 2024, I don't know that there's more awareness with benzodiazepines, but certainly there's more awareness with opioid use disorder. And we hear quite a bit, or we see quite a bit of the portrayal of withdrawal from the opioids, whether that's prescription medications or heroin. And most people can picture what that withdrawal syndrome looks like from those medications. And yet it's not as life threatening as the withdrawal that happens with benzodiazepines. And yet we treat these medications, I would say culturally, as a general statement, a lot more casually. And so this is where, with my patients, I often will say just to be aware of what a trap it can be, because nobody said to you, "Hey, Melissa, take this illicit medication or this illegal medication." They said, "Here's this wonderful medication that comes from your local pharmacy, and I'm going to write you a prescription and then more prescriptions for it." So it's just so easy to get into the situation. And of course, your example is an extreme one. And I'm sorry that that happened to you. But for even people who are taking lower doses, they have to be very careful when they come off these medications. And I know you realized that. And thankfully, you were able to finally find a doctor who would be slow and conscientious with you. That must have been such a relief to just finally have somebody who would partner with you.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, so I had worked with a really lovely doctor for I think 5 months prior. And she had said to me, I've never gotten anyone off this high of a dose. I don't even know how we're supposed to do it. And we tried for about 5 months, and my withdrawals were so severe. She said, I'm afraid we're going to kill you. And so she said, I'm going to look through my entire network and see if I can find someone that's a specialist. And I thought, this is crazy that this is a drug that is used so commonly and that people can get just by saying, oh, I'm not sleeping well, and not be informed that this is a radically addictive drug, a very, very strong, powerful, great drug in the arsenal that is needed for emergency care, but for long-term use is really dangerous. And so she looked through her network, didn't find anyone. I finally checked in with several people that I knew in my network, and somehow both of them came up with the same person who is one of two addictionologists in Utah. And having someone that really got it was like a balm, because even my friends were like, wait, what? Okay, you're addicted to something? Oh no, you're dependent. Okay, so what does that mean? And why does it have to take a year? Like they'd never heard of such a thing. So to also be in a state where my social support system was in a state of disbelief, like they were trying to put it into some narrative that they understood, and they were like, why don't you just go to one of those rehab centers and sweat it out for a month? Like, we don't get it. So to find someone who really got it, that could also educate me even further and help with the intense withdrawals, was just a miracle for me.
And I don't think it can be excuse me, I don't think it can be overstated how important it is to have a support system when you navigate something like this. You have several people that you mention in the book who come and help you with childcare. You even have friends who make space for you to live in their home so that you can have these nights that are so difficult and not have to worry or think about the kids either hearing you or needing you. I mean, I'm not even sure if it would be possible to go through this process without a support system. Do you agree?
Oh gosh, I don't know how someone would do it, because it was so on every level. It wasn't just the physical torture basically that you went through every day, the memory loss, not knowing, really having your support system gets smaller. Anyone that's been through any kind of trauma or illness, you find out who your real support system is. And then, but I think also the emotional component. I had never been so emotionally raw, just like a raw nerve. So like my limbic system felt like it was just all over the place. I used to make jokes about how my amygdala, which is my understanding, the part of the brain where there's a lot of like fear response, felt like it was just on fire. So I would be like the amygdala fire. And if I didn't have a support system, I can't imagine going through something like that and having been successful.
And talking about support, Michael, probably a lot of people think of pharmacists as being the person behind the counter that fills your pill bottles or tells you when drugs interact with one another. But I'm lucky to work on a team where I have someone like you who can partner in caring with patients. And maybe you can tell our listeners what pharmacists can do. For example, if you're taking a medication with side effects or you're trying to taper off a medication that's really difficult, just give us that concept of what having a pharmacist on your team can mean.
Yeah, that great, Dr. Milstein. So, uh, traditionally, I'd say 6 out of every 10 pharmacists work in your community. So, at grocery stores or drugstores, in your neighborhood. But those pharmacists, oftentimes, one of them at a time is taking care of the entire community that day. So they may not have time to dive deep into the 5 to 20 medications that each individual may be taking, to go over what to expect, how to take it, what do you do if you miss a dose, what are the common side effects, what do you do if those side effects occur, what kind of conversations you should bring up with your physician if issues arise. But more importantly, when it comes to, I'll say, tolerance or controlled substances or drug interactions with those types of medications, the pharmacist can play a pivotal role in helping strategically develop like a taper plan or strategy based off of what other medical conditions you have, what other medications you're taking, how long you've been taking the medication in question. Sometimes there's drug food interactions. Sometimes there's drug disease interactions. Uh, there's a new emerging study of, your genes and how you respond to certain drugs, and if a certain drug in a certain class may be better for you based off of, how the individual patient metabolizes that medication. I think that pharmacists play a central role on the healthcare team that the clinician has to lead, and they can help improve outcomes when patients need to discontinue these medications safely.
And also, people should feel empowered to ask their primary care practices if they have a pharmacist who can be an enormous resource for things like streamlining your medications, but also looking at some of the risks that come with your medications. So, we've been talking today about Blood Orange Night, which is the very brave, very important memoir by Melissa Bond about benzodiazepines, which are very common medications that come with huge side effects and potential for dependence and harm. So I want to thank both of you, Melissa and Michael, for being here with me to talk about this important topic and invite our listeners to check out the show notes for more information on this topic. Read Talk Grow is a product of the Women's Health Center at Mayo Clinic. This episode was made possible by the generous support of Ken Stevens. Our producer is Lisa Speckhard-Pask, and our recording engineer is Rick Andreessen. Visit our show notes to see the books discussed today and for links to other health education materials. Follow us on social media like Instagram and Facebook, or reach out directly to our email, readtalkgrow@mayo.edu, with suggestions for books or topic ideas. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not designed to replace a physician's medical assessment and judgment. Information presented should not be relied on as medical advice. Please contact a healthcare professional for medical assistance if needed for questions pertaining to your own health. Keep reading, everyone.